Hello, my name's Gabriella. At my sister's wedding, they handed me a place card that read, "Fake Daughter." Everyone at the table laughed, like it was just another joke I should be used to by now. But what they didn't know was that in my clutch was the document that proved everything they'd tried to erase, a legal adoption paper signed by the man they all claimed to love. So, I smiled, walked up to the screen, and projected it in front of everyone. The room fell silent, and now I wonder, how long have they rehearsed my absence? How many lies have they wrapped in smiles, waiting for me to disappear? Would you like to see what silence really sounds like? The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the ballroom was the smell of polished wood mixed with magnolia blossoms. The late spring sunlight still streamed in through the tall windows, catching on crystal chandeliers and scattering light across white tablecloths. A string quartet played something soft and familiar near the back. For a moment, I let myself believe the scene could be normal. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, today would be different. No games, no side remarks, no reminders of where I supposedly stood in this family. I slowed my pace, taking in the sight of my sister Lorian standing near the head table in her ivory gown. Cameras flashed around her like fireflies. She was radiant, as always. People called her perfect since we were kids, and she made sure to live up to it. I had learned to stand at the edges of her spotlight. It was easier to breathe there, but weddings have a way of pulling you into the center whether you want it or not. I smoothed my dress and held my clutch a little tighter. I scanned the tables for my name card. Each setting had a neat, cream-colored card with gold script. The whole room hummed with chatter. Guests leaned close to each other, voices low, like we were all actors about to perform in a play. I tried to ignore the looks, those faint, polite smiles people give when they're not sure what to make of you. My heels clicked softly on the marble as I made my way to the seat marked for me. I found it at the far side of one of the tables near the dance floor. The chairs were gold with white cushions, napkins folded into tiny swans. I set my clutch down and reached for the card without thinking. My fingers brushed the thick paper. The calligraphy wasn't mine. It wasn't even a name. 2 words stared back at me in sharp black ink. Fake daughter. My breath caught. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. I blinked and tried again. The words didn't change. Around me, the chatter blurred into a low hum, like a radio between stations. I felt the warmth drain from my face. My first instinct was to hide the card, to slip it into my bag before anyone saw. But my hands froze. My palms were damp. My eyes darted to the other cards at my table. Everyone else had proper names. Dr. Martin, Mrs. Carr, Uncle Henry. Not me. I could feel someone's gaze before I saw it. I turned and met Lorian's eyes across the room. She was standing with a champagne flute in her hand, head slightly tilted, watching. Her lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. The guests near her fell silent. Then, with a little shrug that only she could make look elegant, she raised her voice just enough for everyone around to hear. "Well, it's true." A small, sharp laugh followed, hers alone. Not a joke, not even playful, just a cold confirmation. People at my table shifted. One woman cleared her throat, another reached for her drink. No one said anything. The string quartet kept playing, but the notes felt tinny now, like a soundtrack to a humiliation I hadn't agreed to. I straightened my back, pressing my knees together under the table. I could feel the tremor in my hands as I laid the card face down. My heart thudded against my ribs, but my face stayed neutral. Years of practice. You don't survive a family like mine by showing what you feel. You survive by memorizing everything, by storing every detail like evidence for a case you'll never file. My mind recorded it all. The chandelier light glinting off Lorian's bracelet, the shade of lipstick she chose for her big day, the way Brookeette, my mother, pretended not to hear. I heard a man at the next table whisper, "Did you see that?" Another voice hissed, "Don't get involved." Their words floated like smoke. I kept my eyes down and let my fingers trace the edge of the napkin, rough against my skin. My mouth was dry, but I didn't reach for my water glass. I could taste metal, like pennies, in the back of my throat. Inside, a different story played. A story of all the times I'd stood off to the side, the last to know, the first to be forgotten. Birthdays where my name was spelled wrong on the cake, holidays where my seat was mysteriously taken. And yet I came, I kept showing up, because that's what family is supposed to be. You keep showing up. But this was different. This was written, printed, displayed. 2 words that erased 34 years of trying to belong. I lifted my head slowly and scanned the room for any sign of an ally, a cousin, an aunt, anyone. All I met were eyes quickly looking away. I caught Brookett's profile. She was talking to a guest, her smile tight, as if nothing unusual had happened. She didn't move. She didn't even glance my way. A string of thoughts ran through me like a checklist. Don't cry. Don't run. Don't give them a scene. I breathed through my nose, steadying myself. I forced a small, practiced smile, the kind you give a stranger when they step on your foot and don't apologize. I even adjusted my necklace, a gesture of control. It didn't matter. Inside, my chest burned. The music shifted to something brighter. A waiter passed, setting down salads I couldn't taste. The room carried on, but to me, everything slowed. I could hear my own pulse louder than the quartet. I stared at the card under my hand and thought, not for the first time, maybe I should have stopped coming. Maybe today was my answer. But even in that moment, part of me observed, not just felt. The chandeliers swayed slightly with the air conditioning. Lorianne was laughing again, turning back to her new husband. Brooquette raised her glass. The guests went on chewing, smiling, clinking silverware. The performance resumed as if my humiliation were a minor glitch in their perfect program. I sat back, folded my hands in my lap, and let my eyes settle on the stage where the speeches would soon begin. My jaw ached from holding it tight. I could already feel the old armor sliding into place, the one that lets me walk out of a room with my head high even when my heart is dragging behind. This time, though, something different flickered under the shame. Not rage exactly, but a slow, deliberate heat, like a match waiting for a strike. I stayed still, breathing through it, and began to plan without even realizing it. When you've been treated as invisible for so long, invisibility becomes a weapon. They didn't know it yet, but I was watching. I was remembering. Every detail would matter later. A waiter leaned toward me and murmured, "Everything okay, ma'am?" His eyes flicked to the card, then away. I gave him the same smile I'd given everyone else. "Perfect," I said, my voice steady. Just perfect. I cut into the salad, not tasting it, and waited for the next moment to come, because I already knew this wasn't over. It never is. Not with this family. Not with Lorianne. Not with Brooquette. But this time, I wouldn't just endure. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the card one more time, feeling the indent of the ink. Then I slipped it into my clutch. A small act of possession. Evidence. Proof. But that was only the beginning. The silence around me spoke louder than any laugh. The quartet's melody shifted into something livelier as the afternoon waned into evening. The chandeliers caught the dimmer light now, casting softer shadows across the room. Waiters floated between tables with silver trays, refilling glasses, collecting plates. The reception moved forward like a machine, elegant and well-rehearsed. From my corner at the far end of the main table, it felt like I'd slipped into a soundproof box, my eyes watching, my ears hearing, but everything landing muted and distant. I reached for the wine glass in front of me. The stem felt cool under my fingertips. I turned it slightly, watching the liquid catch the gold light. I thought about standing up, about saying something, anything, but instead I stayed seated, running through every possible outcome. If I confronted Lorianne now, I would be the one who ruined the wedding. If I demanded an apology, they would roll their eyes, say I was making a scene. Years of this had taught me the cost of speaking up too soon. Silence had always been my cheapest form of self-protection, but tonight it was starting to feel like a noose. My mother sat 2 tables away, near the head of the room. Brooquette had chosen a soft blue dress that photographed well under warm lights. She clinked glasses with an old friend of hers, smiling as though nothing had happened minutes earlier. She didn't look my way once. That had been her gift for as long as I could remember, preserving appearances no matter what. She could stand next to a burning house and compliment the paint color. Even now, as her youngest daughter sat humiliated in full view of her guests, she performed her part perfectly. I wanted her to turn. Just once. Meet my eyes. Give me some sign that she saw me. Instead, she leaned in to whisper something to her friend, laughed lightly, and adjusted her pearl necklace. Her hands were steady. Mine weren't. At my table, the guests had moved on. They passed bread, compared vacations, took pictures of their plates for social media. No one glanced at me. A man I didn't know nodded briefly and then turned his back. The groom himself came by to shake hands with a cousin. His eyes skipped over me like I was part of the tablecloth. Even the family dog had once been greeted warmer than this. It was like I had ceased to exist the moment Lorian spoke those words. I stared down at my hands resting on my lap. My nails dug lightly into my skin, a grounding trick. In my head, I rehearsed what I might have said. That's not my name. That's not who I am. Or, congratulations, Lorian, on turning your wedding into a sideshow. But every line I imagined ended the same way, with me looking like the problem. So I stayed quiet, let the hum of their voices roll over me, and counted the beats of my heart. A waiter set down a fresh basket of rolls. I thanked him softly. He gave me a sympathetic glance, but moved on. The air smelled of butter and champagne. I sat upright, eyes on my untouched plate, feeling the isolation thicken around me. People think loneliness is about being alone. It's not. It's being surrounded by people who act as though you're not there. Across the room, Brooquette rose to make a toast. Her voice carried clearly. Gracious, warm, full of practiced affection. Family is everything, she said, holding up her glass. The guests murmured approval, glasses clinking. The words hit me like cold water. Family is everything. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat but swallowed it. Her speech went on about love, about unity, about Lorian being a beacon of grace, not a single syllable about me, not even my name. I looked down at my lap again, the faint outline of the place card pressed against the fabric of my clutch. Evidence, proof. My breathing steadied. That's when something shifted inside me, not a breakdown, but a realization, sharp and clear. They were never going to love me the way I hoped, not here, not now, not ever. And if I kept waiting for them to change, I'd spend the rest of my life standing in this corner. A memory surfaced unbidden. Christmas when I was 12, standing by the tree holding the gift I'd wrapped for my mother. She'd opened it with a polite smile, then turned to Lorian with shining eyes at the necklace she'd received. My gift had ended up on a side table, forgotten. The same pattern, the same script, over and over. Tonight was just another performance, only now the audience was larger. I straightened in my chair, feeling my back press against the wood. My fingers relaxed their grip on the napkin. I scanned the room again, slower this time. No one was coming. No cousin rushing over to whisper, "Hang in there." No old family friend reaching out a hand. Nothing. Just faces turned elsewhere, their laughter rising and falling like waves that never touched me. I exhaled, long and steady, and thought, I didn't come here for their approval. I came to witness one last lie, and end it. That thought surprised me with its steadiness. I wasn't begging for a seat at their table anymore. I was gathering facts. Observing, waiting. The quartet shifted to a softer piece. Someone dimmed the lights slightly as evening deepened. Through the tall windows, Charleston's sky turned from pale gold to blue. Streetlights flickered on outside, their glow faint through the glass. The reception buzzed louder with drink and celebration. My world stayed quiet, a clear bubble in the noise. I raised my glass finally, not to toast, but to wet my lips. The wine tasted like nothing. I set it down and folded my hands again, thinking of the envelope I had found days before in a drawer at home, the one my grandfather had left, the one Brooquette must have hoped I'd never see. That was why I came tonight, not to be included, to be ready. Someone at the next table laughed loudly. Lorian's voice floated above the crowd, rehearsed and bright, thanking people for coming. My eyes stayed on her, but my mind was somewhere else, running a checklist of the steps I had already taken. This was not endurance anymore. This was preparation. The band paused for a moment to retune. The sudden quiet in the room gave me a flash of my own reflection in the window, sitting upright, hands clasped, eyes steady. Not invisible at all, not to myself. I thought that would be the last time I'd ever feel that kind of cold. But I was wrong. I pushed open the French doors and stepped onto the garden patio. A hush greeted me like an old friend. The air outside was noticeably cooler, a welcome contrast to the thick warmth of the ballroom. Behind me, the muted strains of the string quartet floated through the open glass, trailing after clinking glasses and laughter that had started to feel more like static. Out here, crickets chirped in a delicate rhythm, as if nature was trying to soothe what the party had unraveled. Lanterns swayed gently from shepherd hooks nestled in the azalea bushes, their soft amber light dancing across the stone path. Each step my heels took on the threshold echoed with restraint. I paused, finally allowing my shoulders to sink, if only a little. Inside, I had smiled until my cheeks hurt. I had nodded at stories I wasn't part of, clapped for speeches that didn't include me, and laughed on cue. Out here, I was no one's prop. I moved toward the edge of the terrace, my hand brushing the cool iron railing. I looked up at the evening sky as it shifted from honeyed gold to muted lavender. Charleston was exhaling, the last hints of day sinking below the skyline. My breath matched the pace, slow, almost meditative. For the first time that evening, I remembered that I still had a body, a voice, a name not bound to someone else's narrative. Gabriella? The voice was gentle, hesitant. I turned, and there she was, Cariel. Of all the faces I had prepared myself to see tonight, hers wasn't one. She had changed, her curls shorter, her eyes more tired but still piercing. She wore no glittering gown, no statement necklace, a simple navy wrap dress and sandals. She must have come through the side garden entrance or been seated out back, away from the spotlight, or maybe she had never gone inside at all. Her presence, unexpected and unpolished, was grounding. "They still do it, don't they?" she asked softly. No preamble, no small talk, just truth. Her voice didn't carry pity, it carried recognition. She knew, she remembered. And that was the chord I hadn't expected to hear tonight, the sound of someone remembering with me. I nodded slowly. Yes. That word didn't begin to cover it, but it was enough. It carried years, years of being the girl who blended into family portraits only to be cropped out in real life, years of being called a guest in my own home, years of watching others be celebrated while I was explained. Cariel stepped beside me, close enough to feel her presence, but not invade the space I didn't yet know how to share. We stood in silence for a long beat, just watching the garden below. The bushes rustled in the breeze, cicadas hummed their song, and the world continued spinning, indifferent and beautiful. The moment pulled me backwards, into a night I rarely revisited. Lorian's graduation. She was radiant that night, valedictorian, scholarship offers, a speech that made the local paper. The stage lights were warm and blinding. My mother beamed beside her, proud and vibrant, their hands locked like a photograph of success. I had sat in the back row with extended family, in a lavender dress that wasn't mine, and shoes that pinched. When Mom introduced me to another parent, her voice slid like silk. "This is Gabriella, a family friend." The words stuck in my throat then. They still burned now. I had searched the crowd for refuge, for contradiction, for someone to pull me back into belonging. My grandfather sat on the opposite side of the hall. He met my eyes briefly, but he didn't stand. He didn't speak. His silence became my cage. And tonight, it was all back. The exclusion painted in pleasantries, the absence disguised in etiquette. Cariel's voice broke the spiral. "You never deserved that," she whispered. "Not then, not now." I swallowed hard. Her voice had always been quiet, but tonight it carried more weight than anything inside that ballroom. "Do you remember?" she asked, eyes still forward. "When we used to build blanket forts in your backyard, we swore we'd always protect each other." She turned slightly. "I meant it. I still do." Tears welled up unexpectedly. Not because her words were sad, but because they cracked something open, a dam of acceptance I had never received from those who claimed to love me. I let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." It felt inadequate. But sometimes gratitude is the only thing you can offer when someone helps you hold the weight you've carried alone. The lanterns flickered again, catching the light in her eyes as she gave me a small, knowing nod. And then she walked away, back into the shadows, into the night, maybe into my past. But her words stayed. I turned toward the ballroom. Through the tall windows, I saw silhouettes moving, glasses raised in cheer, dresses spinning like slow whirlpools. They were celebrating a legacy I had always been part of, but never claimed by. Their laughter didn't reach me here. It had never really included me, anyway. I looked down at my clutch. Inside, tucked carefully in the silk lining, was the envelope. My grandfather's handwriting curled across the front. The legal adoption confirmation. The final letter he wrote before he passed. A letter I had never shown anyone, not because I was ashamed, but because I was waiting for a moment when the truth would not be swallowed whole. Tonight, the envelope felt heavier than paper. It felt like bricks of memory and unspoken truths. It held the weight of silence, and it was time to speak. I pressed my hand over it, grounding myself. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a guest. I had roots here, even if they had tried to prune me away. From behind the glass, someone laughed loudly. Another toast, another performance. But I didn't flinch. I watched it with the steady gaze of someone who no longer begged to be included. The night didn't swallow me. It carried me. I stood beneath the moonlight, tall and quiet. I wasn't just surviving. I was remembering. And tonight, silence would end. I carried the envelope with me like a small, secret weight as I slipped back indoors. The wedding noise felt muffled now, laughter and conversation like a TV playing in another room, while my footsteps on the corridor tile were crisp and private. I moved away from the head table and the clustered cameras, past framed family portraits and a side door marked bridal suite, until I found the little lounge they'd set aside, 2 upholstered chairs, an antique love seat, and a low table with a vase of wilting roses no one had bothered to refresh. I sat down and let my back sink into the cushions. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and perfume. A wall sconce threw a small pool of light over the envelope in my hands. For a moment, I just held it, noticing the paper's weight, the slight impression of the handwriting on the front. My grandfather's looped letters, steady, old-fashioned, had written my name. Seeing it there made the tightness in my chest loosen a degree, as if someone had set a hand on my shoulder and given me permission to breathe. Outside, the band was still playing. Someone laughed loudly and a clink of glasses traveled even through the lounge door. Inside, it was quiet enough for me to hear the tick of a clock and the soft rustle of the curtains. I smoothed the envelope on my knee, fingers tracing the edges as if touch could confirm reality. I had found this envelope earlier that week, tucked inside a book in my grandfather's study, the book he'd read every winter. I'd meant to ask about it then, but there'd always been a reason to postpone. Now, with the card labeled "Fake Daughter" burning a hole in my memory, the paper in my lap felt like the only honest thing left. With a steadying breath, I slit the flap and let the pages fall open. The first sheet was his handwriting, short, blunt, not flowery. "Gabriella," it began. "If anyone questions whether you belong, show them this. If I do not speak in person, let these words and the signatures speak for me." The note ended with his nickname for me, Gabe, and a small flourish that made the sight of it both utterly ordinary and devastatingly final. Underneath the note, there it was, official, exact, undeniable. A typed document with the header of the county clerk's office, the notarization stamp, my grandfather's full name, and below that, my name listed as his adopted child. The paper had signatures, his ink, a notary's stamp, a date. Legal language I could recite now by heart. Adoption, guardian, full rights as a child. The document left no room for the petty rewordings my mother had used for decades. It wasn't a family story. It was law. I felt something give in me, less like falling and more like unclenching. A small, sharp sound escaped me, a single exhale that could have been a laugh or a sob. I read the pages again, slower, as if reading them once hadn't been real enough. The adoption wasn't some informal promise my grandfather had murmured in private. It had been made official. He had chosen me in a way that mattered beyond wishes and words. Tears came then, but not the melodramatic kind I feared. They were precise and quiet, salt and relief mixing in my mouth. I rested my forehead against the paper, feeling the imprint of the type through the thin sheets. For 34 years, I'd worn a label stitched by other people. Guest. Friend. The polite half-truths that let them avoid saying the thing they could not admit. Now the label was gone from my name and etched instead on a legal sheet sealed by authority. Images crowded the margins of my thoughts, my grandfather teaching me to knot a tie, him calling me into his workshop to show me how to sand a chair, him slipping me a coin when I was small and saying, "Buy yourself something you like." I could hear his voice, the low, patient cadence that had steadied me as a child. He'd been the only one who ever used my childhood nickname without hesitation. If those small moments had been ordinary, the adoption explained why my mother had always been so careful with her words, why she could acknowledge a social obligation and refuse a private truth. I understood, in a way that didn't excuse her, that Brookeette felt bypassed. She'd been the daughter who'd watched her own father place his affection on someone else. That resentment had been contagious, a poison she'd carried like a secret family heirloom and passed down without thinking. I folded the papers back into the envelope with deliberate gentleness. The fold felt ceremonial, like putting a small, sacred object back into its shrine. I didn't want to shove the truth away. I wanted to hold it where I could see it. I slipped the envelope into my clutch, tucking it behind the lining where it would stay warm and private. It became something I could carry at my side, a compass rather than a weapon. For a while I just sat with that knowledge, letting it settle. Being chosen by my grandfather meant something nobody could take away without breaking the law, and, more importantly, without proving my grandfather a liar. Their jokes, their stories, their refusal to name me, those were not just meanness or oversight. Those were attempts to overwrite what had been formally established. And now I had the document to restore what had been written down as truth. I thought about Lorian, the practiced smile, the way she'd leaned into the performance of being the perfect daughter. I thought about the ways people who seek approval will often double down on it, punishing anyone who threatens their spotlight. Jealousy wears itself in strange patterns, and in our family, it had been disguised as propriety. But knowing the why shifted something inside me from wounded to alert. If Brookeette's behavior came from feeling sidelined by her own father, then her actions were predictable. If Lorian's cruelty was a shield she'd learned to wield, then it had edges I could anticipate. I began, without fanfare, to map the room in my mind, not just the people and where they sat, but who they were when they thought no one was watching. The cousin who fished for compliments, the aunt whose smile always arrived second, the in-laws who thrived on being noticed. I catalogued mannerisms, alliances, little habits that would prove useful later. The lounge door opened and closed somewhere down the hall, the muffled sound a reminder that the night was still moving along, that speeches would be made and cake would be cut. I rose from the love seat, testing the weight of my clutch against my hip. I felt steadier than I had when I first saw the place card. The paper in my bag didn't make me bigger or smaller, it just made me certain. Before I left the room, I smoothed my dress and checked my reflection in the darkened window. The woman who looked back at me was not untouched by hurt. Her eyes had strain in the corners, the kind plain in any long life, and yet there was a comprehension there now, like a lamp switching on. I didn't want drama. I wanted the truth to be seen. I walked back through the corridor, past the portraits, and into the glow of the ballroom. Conversations rose and fell as if nothing had changed. At the doorway, I paused a second to let the noise wash over me. Then I stepped out, not to call anyone out, but because I had something no one expected, certainty, a document that would speak where I had been ignored. I had come to this wedding ready to have my place in the story reclaimed, not with a scene or a shout, but with a quiet demonstration of fact. For all their rehearsed words and perfect glasses, they could not undo the page my grandfather had signed. The truth was no longer buried, and I wasn't going to be either. I stood just outside the ballroom, letting the hum of conversation filter through the heavy double doors. My fingers tightened around the clutch, its shape firm and certain beneath my grip. Inside it, the envelope felt like a live wire, quiet, still, but charged. I took one slow breath, adjusted my posture, and stepped inside. The air had changed. What once felt like celebratory noise now clung to the walls like static. Conversations weren't joyful, they were calculated. The kind that dipped just low enough for plausible deniability, but sharp enough to slice if overheard. Chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, but the warmth was deceptive. It felt like being watched by 1,000 tiny suns, all burning just for me. I moved with intention. The heels of my shoes tapped against polished marble like warning drums. Guests turned. Not quickly, not rudely, but curiously, as if sensing something approaching. A ripple moved through them, an instinctual stirring of discomfort. I passed the mirrored buffet, the champagne tower, the decorative peacocks carved from butter, absurdly extravagant and fragile. Near the head table, Lorian caught sight of me. Her expression didn't shift, but her body betrayed her. Her shoulders stiffened, spine locked straight. Beside her, her new husband leaned in slightly, his fingers twitching against the linen as if sensing her tension. Broquette, across from them, sat frozen with her wineglass halfway to her lips. The glass hovered. Her gaze didn't. The DJ's music softened, fading behind the clinking of cutlery and murmured toasts. A staff member moved toward the mic stand in the center, likely prepping for another speech or sentimental story. Perfect timing. I stood. Just that. Stood. And the atmosphere snapped taut like a pulled string. Conversations died mid-word. Forks paused midway to mouths. The clink of crystal against plates stopped entirely. My motion, though simple, had pierced through the performance of normalcy like a shard of ice. I could feel the air tilt toward me. I walked. Between tables, past outstretched necks and hushed breaths. Guests followed me with their eyes, but no one spoke. I passed a group of distant relatives, one of whom reached as if to stop me, then thought better. The photographer, sensing something shift, half raised his camera, but the uncertainty of the moment stilled his hand. The host stood from his place, his mouth opening in polite confusion. I caught his eye, raised a single hand, a silent command. He hesitated, then sat. That was the moment I realized. I didn't need a microphone. Not tonight. I reached the AV control station at the edge of the room. A sleek black panel, a monitor glowing dimly, a remote resting beside a glass of someone's half-finished cocktail. My hands hovered. For a brief moment, I wondered what would happen if I backed away. If I tucked the envelope back into my purse, returned to my seat, played along. But that moment was gone in a blink. I pressed the button. The ballroom dimmed instantly, lights dropped to a low amber, music cut mid-beat, the sudden silence swallowed the room whole. A few guests shifted in their chairs, murmuring. Someone coughed. The clink of a glass being accidentally tipped rang too loud in the hush. Then the screen flared to life, a black rectangle, then a folder, then the words, Joseph A. Henley, legal adoption file, white text, black screen, no images, no sound, just the title, bold and unapologetic. The projection glowed across every upturned face. I heard a sharp inhale from somewhere on the left side of the room. A cousin of mine audibly gasped. Another whispered, "Is this a joke?" I did not move. I didn't need to explain it. I didn't owe anyone that. The document's existence did all the speaking. It validated what had been denied. It brought the hidden into light. It turned speculation into documentation. My heartbeat was loud in my chest, but I didn't flinch. I stood still and let them look. Let them feel. Not anger, not vengeance, but reality. Cold, undeniable truth. Lorian's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching from across the room. Her hands were perfectly still on the table, but the way her pinky finger trembled betrayed her fury. Broquette's wineglass finally met the table, but her fingers curled around its base like she needed an anchor. Their faces, once smug, once radiant with curated image, were starting to crack under the glare of exposure. I watched eyes flick from the screen to me and back again. Some guests leaned toward their companions, whispering in hushed urgency. Others raised phones, as if unsure whether to film or freeze. I noticed the older aunt, who always clung to family hierarchy, looked down at her hands, as if praying. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. In the silence, the room felt heavier. Years of silent slights and casual erasure filled the space like smoke. The people who once told me to keep the peace, to avoid making a scene, now stared at a truth they could neither deny nor ignore. From somewhere inside me, a calm bloomed. This wasn't vengeance. This was warning. I stepped back from the AV station. The image remained on the screen. I didn't close the file. I didn't remove the USB. Let them see. Let it sit. Let the seed of discomfort take root. As I walked away, I passed a woman whispering to her date, "Is this real?" Her date shrugged, wide-eyed. I passed the host again, who avoided my gaze entirely. The photographer had finally raised his camera, snapping photos not of the screen, but of the faces around it. I reached my table and sat down, slowly, deliberately. No one approached me. No one dared. The balance had shifted, and they knew it. I picked up my glass of water and took a long sip. Lorian still hadn't moved. Brookeette looked like she wanted to vanish. I smiled, not out of spite, but serenity. For once, I didn't have to defend my presence. The truth had done it for me. And in the back of my mind, that quiet voice returned, no longer a whisper. This is only the beginning. The glow from the projector painted pale rectangles across the ceiling, and for a moment, the ballroom felt like a theater caught between acts. The screen flickered once, then steadied. I could hear nothing but the low hum of the AV equipment, the faint clatter of a dropped fork somewhere at the back. My breath was slow, deliberate. My fingers still rested against the clutch at my side, feeling the outline of the envelope like a pulse. This was no longer just a wedding reception. This was an unveiling. Line by line, the file opened. The first page appeared on the giant screen, my grandfather's name, bold across the top. Joseph A. Henley, legal guardian. The font of the county office beneath it, the date stamped in the upper right corner. I watched the letters glow, watched them etch themselves into every person's mind. My own name came next, full and unmistakable, centered on the page. Child, Gabriella Henley. Not guest, not friend. Henley. A collective intake of breath rippled across the room. Hands rose to mouths. Chairs creaked as guests shifted, whispering to one another. Even the DJ at the corner had gone still, one hand hovering above a dial as though the equipment might explain what was happening. My eyes moved from the screen to the crowd, cataloging reactions. A cousin's eyebrows arched, an uncle's face drained of color. Two bridesmaids traded looks and then stared down at their hands. No one clapped, no one laughed. The weight of it pressed on all of them at once. Lorian was the first to break. Her face flushed crimson, and her mouth formed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She let out a short, brittle laugh. "Old documents don't mean anything," she said loudly, her voice cracking on the word old. He was confused, that's all. But the tremor in her tone betrayed her. She glanced around for support, but no one echoed her line. Even her groom stared at the screen, lips slightly parted. I let her words drift and die in the air. Then I turned slowly to where Brookeette sat at the head table. Her wineglass hovered mid-air. For years I had sought her gaze, any flicker of recognition. Now, when I looked directly at her, she shifted her eyes down to the linen, unable to hold me. The red of her lipstick stood stark against her pale face. She reached for a napkin, dabbed her lips once, and kept looking at the table. The screen continued to scroll, revealing the notarization stamp, the signature, a clear, unshakable mark in blue ink. There was my grandfather's hand, steady even in his last years. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a kindness whispered in a workshop. It was binding. My pulse slowed. A quiet pride rose, not loud but solid, like a foundation you'd forgotten was under you all along. I stepped toward the microphone at the edge of the platform. My heels marked each step, sharp and deliberate. Someone at the back muttered, "Is this real?" Another voice answered, "It's signed." That was all. I reached the mic, adjusted it a fraction lower. My hands were steady now. For decades, I had rehearsed explanations that dissolved in my throat. Tonight, I didn't need paragraphs. I needed a sentence. I lifted my eyes to the room, found Lorian's face, then Brookett's, then the edges of the crowd. "You called me fake," I said, voice level, not raised. "But he, the man who raised us, he knew who I really was. And now, so do you." Silence. Not the same silence as before. This one was active, dense, charged. People shifted but didn't look away. Someone exhaled sharply. A glass clinked against a table edge. The screen behind me held steady on the signature like a seal. I didn't linger. I didn't offer an explanation. I stepped back from the microphone, turned, and walked off the stage with the same deliberate pace I had walked up. No applause, no interruption. Just that silence following me down the steps, pooling behind my heels like a tide. As I reached the floor again, the whispers began, low, unsure, weaving through the tables like smoke. A few people looked away as I passed. Others stared openly. Brookette still sat frozen. Lorian's smile had cracked entirely, her lips pressed into a thin line. She reached for her groom's arm, but he pulled back slightly, eyes still on the screen. I moved toward the exit at the side of the room, my clutch tucked under my arm. I didn't need their applause, just their silence, and I got both. I didn't rush to leave. I stayed near the corner of the room, half-shadowed, fully seen. The buzz of the wedding reception had fractured. The music still played, but the atmosphere had shifted. No longer celebratory, no longer certain. Conversations became murmurs, glances stretched longer than comfort allowed. Someone whispered something, then quickly pulled out their phone. I saw it happen in real time, the moment the projection looped again. The proof, the document, the truth. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. There was power in restraint, in letting the silence carry the weight of what had just occurred. The adoption paper had not just been a legal document, it had been a match dropped into a dry forest. I could almost hear the crackling as assumptions began to burn. For years, I had lived in the margins of this family's story. Now, with one flicker of light and one sheet of truth, the narrative had tilted. I scanned the room. Brookette's mouth was tight. Lorian looked like a statue mid-crack, beautiful still but visibly straining. Other guests glanced around, unsure of what to say, what side to take. Their uncertainty wasn't hostile, it was hesitant. And hesitation is often the first step toward recognition. Then, a woman I vaguely remembered from a baby shower leaned toward me. "I didn't know," she said gently. "Truly, I'm sorry." I nodded, offering nothing more than quiet acknowledgement. These moments weren't for revenge or loud satisfaction. They were checkpoints. Subtle shifts. Proof that even the best constructed illusions eventually break under the weight of truth. From where I stood, I watched Lorian. Earlier, she had glowed. Now, she glared. Her smile was gone, her posture rigid. She clenched her champagne flute so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Someone beside her said something. It was meant to soothe clearly. But she cut them off with a barked laugh and abruptly pushed her chair back. The attention that followed her rise wasn't admiration, it was tension. The shift was stark. This wasn't the elegant bride floating across the dance floor, it was a storm gathering in heels. She snapped, "This night was supposed to be mine." The words echoed, sharp and brittle, snapping across the hush that had overtaken the room. Her voice cracked the evening's surface, and the ripple ran deep. She slammed her flute down on the table. Glass rang like a small explosion. Then, without waiting for comfort or confrontation, Lorian turned and stormed off. The silk of her dress swirled behind her like a curtain dropping on an act she could no longer control. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The moment had already passed, and it belonged to neither her outrage nor my silence. It belonged to the truth now hanging in the air like smoke. Seen, undeniable, and slow to clear. Guests shifted. A few murmured apologies. Some avoided my gaze entirely. Others, those who had once echoed Brookette's smug commentary or Lorian's curated superiority, seemed unsure whether to retreat or approach. One older man, gray and soft-spoken, tapped my hand lightly. "He spoke of you often," he said, eyes kind, "and always with pride." I swallowed back a sudden rush of emotion. His words were not loud, but they felt like a clearing of the fog. From the head table, Brooquette tried to regain control. She lifted her voice, smooth but strained. "She's just overwhelmed. It's an emotional night after all." But her tone couldn't cover the fissure beneath the foundation. The old script, poise, deflection, false concern, no longer played well in this new light. No one responded. A few people tilted their heads in sympathy. But it wasn't for her. It was for me. For the girl they hadn't looked at properly. For the woman who had once stood in the wings and now, without theatrics, stood at the center. The rest of the evening unfurled like a slowed-down domino line. One by one, small things fell. Guests regrouped, whispered apologies surfaced. A neighbor's wife leaned in and said, "I always wondered why you were so distant." Another added, "I feel foolish. I believed everything they said." These weren't confessions, they were acknowledgments. And even if they came late, they mattered. Then, like a single note rising above the rustle of recovering calm, a familiar figure stood from the back of the room. Carrielle. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Our families had once shared holidays before time, and politics made space. She moved with quiet confidence to the center of the room. When she spoke, her voice cut through everything. "She deserves better." No fluff, no preamble, just truth. A pause, then clapping, tentative, unsure. Then louder. A few guests stood. A soft ripple turned into a current. It wasn't celebration. It was recognition. I didn't curtsy. I didn't cry. I stood still, arms at my side, letting the weight of acknowledgement settle. It wasn't about vindication. It was about finally being visible, no longer the footnote in someone else's glory story. The room adjusted. Tables cleared. Music resumed, softer now. The cake was still untouched, but no one seemed to remember it. The bride had exited, but her vanishing act wasn't the finale. It was the intermission before a new act, one where I no longer needed permission to exist. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own family's memory. The ballroom, once lit with opulence and choreographed charm, had descended into something far quieter. The lights dimmed just enough to blur intentions. Crystal glasses sat half-filled and forgotten, their clinks replaced by the weight of silence. You could feel it, thick in the air, pulsing beneath the polished floor like a drumbeat no one wanted to acknowledge. People didn't breathe so much as brace. I could almost hear the collective grip of anticipation tightening, and at the center of it all, me. Not a bride, not a daughter of honor, but a rupture they hadn't seen coming. The screen behind the dais, where a highlight reel of my sister's life had been looping moments before, had gone black minutes ago. But no one moved, no one dared speak louder than a whisper. It was as though the truth hadn't just arrived, it had taken the microphone, paused the music, and demanded its audience. Brooquette sat at the head table, barely clinging to her posture. She looked like a painting someone had spilled water on, still recognizable, but distorted. Her fingers clutched the cloth napkin in one hand while the other fluttered aimlessly near her chest, as if she could physically calm the pounding underneath. She opened her mouth once, nothing came out. Tried again. I never meant... Her voice cracked like thin ice, and then came the collapse. She wept. It wasn't performative. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't the kind of breakdown that garners sympathy. It was raw, private, unraveling. And it was happening in front of 200 witnesses who had, for years, placed her on a pedestal carved from curated lies. My chest tightened unexpectedly, not with pity, not exactly, but with recognition. That was the version of her no one ever saw. Maybe not even she recognized it. A woman at table 11 murmured, "She let this fester all these years." Someone across from her nodded gravely. Whispers spread like wildfire. No one called for the DJ. No one offered a toast to move things along. They watched the screen, the silence, the breakdown. They watched her. And in doing so, they watched themselves. Because this wasn't just Brookett's collapse. It was the undoing of every complicit silence. Then came the shift. From the back of the room, Carrie stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stepped forward with a grace that didn't ask for attention, but demanded it anyway. Her heels clicked gently against the ballroom floor, each step echoing louder than the music that had long since died. She stopped near the dance floor, her silhouette catching the amber light from a nearby sconce. "I've watched this family belittle her for decades," she said, her voice slicing clean through the tension. "And the lie we were all told? That she was fake. But she wasn't. She was just never allowed to be real." Her words fell into the silence like stones into a lake, rippling, undeniable. Carrie turned toward the head table, her eyes meeting Brookett's, then glancing toward Lorian's empty chair. "Tonight wasn't chaos," she continued. "It was clarity, and clarity hurts, but it also frees." And then, softly at first, the room applauded. Not everyone, not thunderously, but genuinely. Some stood, moved by something they couldn't quite name. Some cried. Quiet, restrained sobs tucked behind trembling hands. Men cleared their throats. Women reached for tissues. A teenager at the far table pulled out their phone, then hesitated, realizing this wasn't a moment for stories. It was the end of one. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply nodded once toward Carrie. Our eyes locked, and we exchanged something wordless. Gratitude, maybe. Recognition. A bond formed not by blood, but by survival. And then I walked. The crowd parted gently as I passed, shoulders turning, gazes following, some filled with shame, some with awe. No cameras, no spotlight. Just me, walking in the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but pregnant with meaning. When I reached the side door, I paused. Behind me, Brookette tried once more. "She's just emotional," she croaked, almost pleading. "She doesn't understand what she's doing." But it was too late. Her voice had lost its grip. No one turned to help her finish the sentence. No one rescued her with a laugh or a polite toast to smooth the awkwardness. She was alone at a table of ghosts. Lorian wasn't coming back. She had fled the room 20 minutes ago, her phone still clutched in hand, likely aware that her image would soon trend for all the wrong reasons. I didn't need to look to know her future wouldn't recover from this night. Not publicly, not privately. Guests huddled in little groups, whispering, shifting allegiances in real time. One man near the bar said softly, "I never saw it like that." That quiet confession struck me harder than all the years of mockery. Because it wasn't just ignorance, it had been willful blindness. And now, with the curtain drawn back, the crowd had to face what they'd ignored. I stepped through the door. It didn't slam. It didn't echo. It simply shut behind me like punctuation. Outside, Charleston's summer air hugged me. Thick, fragrant, forgiving. The scent of magnolia mixed with something sharper. Freedom. I looked up. The clouds were drifting. The sky wasn't empty. It was opening. I stood still for a moment, feeling the night on my skin. I hadn't come for vengeance. That would have meant I wanted them to suffer. I didn't. I came for truth. And I got it. Because in the quiet after the storm, in the stillness after the chaos, one thing became blindingly clear. When lies finally fall, they make room for the kind of truth no one can forget. And that was enough. The asphalt still radiated the day's warmth as I crossed the small parking lot, heels clicking against the ground like a heartbeat. The night smelled of magnolia and exhaust. A thin mist hung low, wrapping the parked cars in a silver haze. My clutch felt heavier than it should have, even though it held only a folder, a phone, and one photograph that had been tucked away for decades. I passed the gift table just before stepping outside. A staffer, trying to keep things normal, held up a small bag tied with a ribbon. "For you, miss," she said softly. "A thank you gift from the couple." I didn't even slow down. "No thank you," I murmured, my voice low but sure. I didn't need their favors. I didn't need one more token of a system that had excluded me for most of my life. My refusal was quiet but final, a cut of clean air in the humid evening. I reached my car, parked under an oak at the far edge of the lot. It had been there since the afternoon, waiting like a silent ally. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, the leather warm against my skin. The venue behind me glowed faintly through tall windows, figures still moving inside, but slower now, like fish after a net is drawn. The adoption papers sat on the passenger seat in a manila folder. Next to them was a small, scuffed wooden frame wrapped in tissue paper. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, eyes closed. My heart didn't pound anymore. It had shifted from adrenaline to something steadier. Not peace yet, but the weight of closure. I reached for the frame and pulled away the tissue. Inside was a photo from when I was 6. My grandfather sat on a wooden porch, sun slanting across his face. He had me in his lap, one arm wrapped securely around me, the other holding a melting ice cream cone. We were both laughing. My hair was tangled. His shirt was rumpled. Nothing about it was polished, but everything about it was real. I traced my thumb over the glass, feeling the outline of our faces beneath the surface. It wasn't a staged portrait, not the kind Brookeette would hang in her formal living room. It was the kind of picture you keep on a nightstand, the kind that survives moves and decades because it matters too much to lose. They may never apologize, I whispered into the car. And that's fine. My voice didn't tremble. It landed on the dashboard like a stone. I stopped needing their apology the moment I remembered who had truly claimed me. I thought about the wedding favors I had declined, about the stunned faces at the tables, about Lorian leaving her own reception in a white dress that now felt like a costume, about Brookeette's napkin pressed to her eyes, her mask slipping. The power dynamic had reversed without me screaming or begging. It had shifted because I had held onto a truth they tried to bury. I started the engine but didn't shift into gear yet. The radio came on softly, some old Motown song my grandfather used to hum in the kitchen. The notes curled around me like a familiar scent. I looked once more at the photo, then at the folder. Those papers weren't just legal proof. They were a bridge between who I had been told I was and who I actually was. Through the windshield, the venue's windows were shrinking into small squares of light. I thought of the children who might grow up in that family. Maybe next time, my name would be spoken without hesitation. Maybe my niece or nephew would hear stories about me without the word guest attached. Maybe nothing would change. But tonight, I had changed. I put the car in drive and eased out of the parking lot, the gravel crunching softly beneath the tires. The road curved past trees heavy with Spanish moss. I rolled down the window and let the warm air slip in. It smelled of salt from the nearby marsh and something else, freedom, maybe, or forgiveness. I didn't look back at the venue. I didn't need to. The chapter behind me had closed itself. I had walked away without their money, without their goodbyes, without a single concession to appearances, but not empty-handed. Because on the seat next to me lay the only photo that had ever made me feel whole. A reminder that family isn't defined by who names you in a toast. It's defined by who never lets you feel alone, even in silence. As the road opened ahead, the radio played louder, and my voice, without realizing, hummed along. The engine hummed, and for the first time in years, so did I. What this night taught me, and maybe teaches all of us, is that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes, the quietest step forward carries the greatest weight. We don't always get the apology we deserve, but we can claim the dignity we were denied. So here's a question for you. Have you ever been labeled something you knew wasn't true? And did you fight it or let it define you? If this story moved you or made you think of your own family story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got more stories coming that will challenge, heal, and reveal, one truth at a time.